Hi, this is Susan Bennett, the original voice of Siri. Here's what's coming up today on another great episode of On the Nose with Randall Kenneth Jones, the new Jones Show podcast.
We also discovered that there was something we could all do to change policy and make a difference. And my view is the reason why I use the term policy entrepreneur is because my view is you don't need to be in government. You don't need to be in business. All of us can contribute to change policy.
If you believe that everyone you meet knows something you don't know, then you're ready for the next bold evolution of the Jones Show podcast. On the Nose with Randall Kenneth Jones introduces you to people who are in the know and ready to share their special brand of know-how with you. From artists, authors, and activists to entertainers, educators, and entrepreneurs, On the Nose will elevate your ability to influence the world we share. Here's the host of On the Nose, Randall Kenneth Jones.
Mike, Michael, or Mick, or Mickey? Would you, Michael? I could call you Mike, Michael, Mickey. I mean, that would be kind of
Mickey's my daughter. She's called Mickey. But
oh, really? Your daughter is Mickey? Oh, that's so cute.
She's that's 6 months old. But
yeah. My daughter, Mary Beth, who's also cute, is 33. So just a skosh older. Baby. The little baby Mickey. Michael Sheldrick. Despite the technical difficulties, I was so passionate about getting here because I am so fired up about talking to you. I thank you for what you do. I thank you for the passion you bring into this work. I thank you for your new book, From Ideas to Impact, a playbook for influencing and implementing change in a divided world. This is a big deal with me. True change makers, I love. And I really want you to help us understand what you do and how we can support you and how we as the public can do more. Because we're not doing enough to make change in our world in the areas that you focus on, which are really environment, which are poverty, which are education, which are all very, very, very important to me. So I have to start with just a few things so that you can explain. Explain to me, what is the organization Global Citizen? What is Global Citizen?
Well, Randy, it's really a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me on. Global Citizen, we're a movement of millions of action takers around the world. We're probably the largest action taking platform when it comes to issues of extreme poverty. We're now numbered 12 million members, and it's people who take action and use their voice to create impact. And we always say action is our currency. We, at the core of our DNA as a movement to end extreme poverty, is this whole idea of pop meets policy. And what I mean by that is we leverage the power of popular culture, principally music, to mainstream issues of extreme poverty, get people fired up about these issues, but we also give them a way to take action. And since we were founded over a decade ago, we've had over 33 million citizen actions, which together with some incredible partners have helped lead to more than $40 billion being distributed to incredible organizations who work day in, day out around the world. And they've helped in some shape, way, or form touch the lives of more than 1.2 billion people.
Those numbers are staggering, but frankly, I'm going to ask you this, not as staggering. 10 years ago, when you were the co-founder of Global Citizen, how old were you?
I was, let me see, I was just over 10 years ago. I think I was around 23 when we formally got this underway.
23. Okay, 23. You started international organization that 10 years later has had that kind of impact. Wow. Why did you do it? There's something in
Well,
your story, something happened in your world that made
yeah.
23-year-old you want to do this. And that's what I want to know.
Well, and many of your listeners might relate to this. When I was at school, first year of high school, I was not a good student. I mean, I was useless at sport. I couldn't kick a football in the right direction, which you have to understand in Australia, not being good at sports in high school is kind of like blasphemy. Okay. So I had that strike against me.
It ain't
The other,
great in the United States either. Okay.
exactly.
It's, I was an arts kid, not a sports kid. So yeah, I
Well,
got
there
you.
you go.
Yeah.
You can relate. So I also wasn't great academically either. I was really bottom of the class. And literally people said, you're not going to get into university, let alone finish high school. And one day we had to do an assignment. We could pick any film we had to write about. I did it on the movie Gladiator, the one with Russell Crowe. It had just come out.
Mhm.
And I wrote this essay. I just had a fascination with Roman gladiators, but I didn't think anything of it. I got home from school and my mum, I always remember this. My mum had a strange look in her eye and she said, there's a message for you on the answer machine. And it was my it was my year 8 teacher, which in Australia, year 8's our first year in high school, Mr. Byrne, who was only 24 himself at the time. And the message went something like this. Hi, Mrs. Sheldrick, my mum. I've noticed a change in Michael. Can you give me a call back? And I literally thought, that's a strange, kind of creepy message. What have I done wrong? That was my first assumption. And the reason why my mum had this confused look in her eyes after years of saying Michael's stupid, lazy, not going to amount to anything, Mr. Burns said, Michael's topped the class. And I went in the next day and he said, I think there's more to you than meets the eye. I think you could be the number one kid in class if you worked hard. And he said, you may not believe in yourself. I do. And he challenged me to work with him, said, I'll help you recess, lunch, after school, whatever you need. Kid you not, last day of high school that year, I was sat on my couch at home. Car comes down the driveway and out pops Mr. Byrne. He was like, I crunched the numbers, couldn't wait tomorrow. Puts out his hand, says, well done, mate. And he gives me this certificate with a number 1. 4 years later, I'm finishing school. I'm in the top 1% of the state, getting into law school. Everyone's like, yeah, the smartest kid around. Like, this is so amazing. And yet I didn't feel that way because I never forgot what it was like to feel like that kid at the start of high school that everyone said is stupid, lazy. And I never forgot the difference that teacher made in my life. And so getting into university, I just thought, wow, there's millions of children around the world who, through no fault of their own, maybe it's because they lack a great teacher, maybe it's because they lack access to healthcare, whatever reason, will never be able to realize their potential. And I thought that's what I want to contribute to. And so I spent my time at university contributing, volunteering, and it was really while at university where the genesis of Global Citizen was born.
Mr. Byrne.
Mr. Byrne.
Let's say his name again, Mr. Byrne. Teachers. I love teachers. I love everything about teachers. I love every time there is a story that celebrates a teacher. You do know you've become one, right? You do know you're a teacher, right?
Well, that's very kind. I hope some people find what I'm saying useful.
Well, I'm telling you, I've read the book. You're a teacher. Literally, this book, From Ideas to Impact, is guiding you through. It's a playbook. It guides you through the process of making change. He's got to be proud of you. He's not that much older than you.
No,
He's
and
really
it was
not.
fun. It was funny. I recently was back in Perth, Australia, where I'm from, most isolated city in the world. And I was recently back there with my wife, who's never been before, our 6-month-old daughter. And he actually came to a book talk, and I got to say that in person. And I don't think the funny thing is he was only my teacher for a year because he got frustrated with this administration. I later found out and left. But I don't think teachers themselves often get to hear all the stories of all the changes they've made in kids' lives. So yeah, I agree with you. It's important to recognize our teachers.
One of my policies, I'm using that word on purpose, one of my policies on this show is I consistently encourage people, if a teacher, a leader, a boss, a mentor changed your life, With the World Wide Web, it's pretty easy to find them, and tell them and let them know and pay it forward. And that may well be one of the best teacher stories I've ever heard.
I agree.
What an
That's very
extraordinary
kind.
man. He must be so proud of you. Now, moving on, you describe yourself as a policy entrepreneur. Now, what is a policy entrepreneur?
So in today's world, there's many ways to make a difference, right? We can donate to charity, we can volunteer our time, you can register to vote in the US. But when it comes to creating policy, change in policy, that often isn't the first thing that comes to mind. It can seem abstract, it can seem vague, but policy is at the end of the day fundamental to addressing many of the issues we care about. And Randy, just to give you an insight as to how I discovered this, I mentioned before I got into university and I started getting involved. How could I contribute to ending poverty, providing education? Like many kids, I started a charity with other friends. We raised, it turned out my only superpower was asking people to give stuff away for free. So I went around my shopping center, went to McDonald's, the equivalent of Starbucks, Happy Meal vouchers and what have you. And I did a quiz night, raised $1,000 and to build a school in Papua New Guinea. And I would go to these schools in my summers and winter breaks. I went to India, Bangladesh, it's Timor-Leste. And, on the one hand, yes, great, we built the bricks and mortars of a school. But then you'd be like, well, who's paying the teacher salary for a year? Who is putting meals on the table every single day? Because often when kids go to school, this is the only meal they're getting. And who is providing access to healthcare or social protection if they get sick? And then you scale that across everywhere where poverty exists, you realize that no amount of gala charity night dinners is going to be enough to end extreme poverty because it's systemic. Poverty is a $100 billion problem a year. And so we realized coming back to Australia at university was just on the cusp of social media and popular culture coming together. We realized that we could use that as a powerful way to really mobilize people to use their voice, take action, and get our governments to act. Because we felt, yes, we could raise even a few $1,000,000, but that's a drop in the ocean against the need. And we also discovered that there was something we could all do to change policy and make a difference. And my view is the reason why I use the term policy entrepreneur is because my view is you don't need to be in government. You don't need to be in business. All of us can contribute to change policy, whether you are a celebrity icon like Taylor Swift, a business leader, an everyday citizen, a high school student, a university student, or a Rotarian, a member of a Rotary Club. There is something we can all contribute to. And the book is really designed as an 8-point guide to really for anyone to begin to advocate for policy change, because we need that if we're to address the biggest issues of our time.
We will get to the list of the celebrities that have helped you, which is extraordinary, and that you've engaged that at already. But one thing that occurred to me when I was preparing for this background, one of my best friends is Peggy Post from formerly of the Emily Post Institute. If you don't know Emily Post wrote a book in 1922 that was the Bible for etiquette. And the family has maintained this brand for years. So over 100 years later, what Peggy had shared is the word etiquette was standing in their way because people thought that was lofty. It was beneath them. It was highbrow. It was getting in the way of the message of etiquette, which you can't really argue with the importance of the message. I feel that way about the word policy. I think the word policy is a problem. Because I believe, now my husband and I discussed this morning, he disagrees with me. So I will say, people, y'all are going to disagree with me, some of you. But policy, I don't feel like we all think we contribute to it. And
No.
policy can be viewed as a negative. And I thought that was interesting because I'm this kind of word nerd. I looked it up. So the first definition I found online of the word policy is a course or principle of action adopted or proposed by a government, party, business, or individual.
That's the key.
That's your person or individual. But guess how they used it in a sentence? the administration's controversial economic policies. They took the word and they spun it in a negative direction.
There you go.
I think the negativity and of the word that's associated with the word, and it's policy, it's policy, it's policy, you can't do this, it's policy, you can't do that. We never say it's policy, you can do this. So I think, how do we jump past the word association with policy? And do you agree with me? Are you on Team Derek and agree with my husband and think it's a perfectly great word?
Well, I think, to be honest, that's really why I mixed it with the term policy entrepreneur, which I first came across that term when I was at university. Full transparency, I had no idea if Global Citizen was going to fly anywhere. And so I was like, what am I going to do if it doesn't? Like, it's great, we've run these campaigns, we had some grant applications out. And so I was applying for a master's in public policy, there's that word again, as a backup, because I was like, well, I didn't want to work as a lawyer. And I was having this debate with my professor at the time for the entrance exam. And I was trying to explain to him what we were doing at Global Citizen. At the time, we were advocating for governments to contribute billions to eradicate polio and make it the second human disease in history. This disease, which has long ravaged the world, been reduced by 99.9%, but still prevalent in a few countries. And he said, okay, you're a policy entrepreneur. And I said, well, what did you mean? And he said, you're using unconventional means to put these issues in front of powerful people. And by unconventional, he said, you're throwing concerts, you're using social media, you're giving tickets away to young people in exchange for them taking action on these issues. This is all unconventional. You're trying to make policy popular, right? And I think, policy, like many terms, it can seem inaccessible, but we have to do a better job at really talking about the fact that policy, in terms of its impact, it's very human, right? It could be about girls in South Africa getting access to sanitary pads and napkins and not having the right policies in place, meaning that girls could miss out on up to 60 days of education a year because they don't have access to something as basic as a period pad, right? At the same time, the people who influence policy, we have to talk about them too, because throughout my career, and the book isn't just about Global Citizen, it's about some of the extraordinary advocates I've met along the way. And whether they're trade union activists, whether they are young teenage women in South Africa who are lobbying the government to remove period poverties from the tax code, because in many parts of the world, period products are considered a luxury item and taxed as such. Or it can be members of a Rotary Club who are inviting their local member of Congress to come and give a speech, and in return advocate in the budget for funding to distribute polio vaccines to developing countries. But policy change is about those people too. It's about those people on the front lines of change, advocating. And so in some respects, this book is an attempt to tell those stories and showcase people where we can make a difference because we are making a difference, and to highlight that.
And everyone can. And you do have the case studies and you do tell the stories. And I'm bringing up the negativity about policy. We actually all can make an impact. We truly, truly can. My major impact is this show. So I have a policy with this show. When I get a phone call and a pitch for a guest that makes me nervous, or I feel like I have the potential to not look smart in front of, I say yes. With you, I thought the potential was like, I'm not going to be smart enough for this guy. So I had to say yes. And you know why? Because I thought policy, that's government stuff. It's governmental policy. My contribution is this show. My contribution is this show, and trying to put an element of positivity and change makers and people who are doing right by the world and making a positive contribution. I'm always my other policy. Look for the best in people. Try to present that. And then you actually make an observation in the book that many leaders are amplifying division. They're forwarding their own candidacy by amplifying that division, which I never really thought about it. That I'd never thought that. Very good friend of this show, Aaron Brockovich, very good friend of mine, wrote a book called Superman's Not Coming. Superman's not. For whatever reason, we think all over the world, I think you would agree, that somebody else is going to solve this problem. Ain't going to happen, people. We're going to have to do something. And my favorite part of the introduction of From Ideas to Impact is when Idris and Sabrina Elba made the comment that the most important thing was just to show up.
Yeah.
Do something.
Yeah.
How do we get people to do something? Why are we so lazy? Why do we think Superman's coming? Why do we ignore it? What's the problem? How do we get action? How do we do it? That this show can do. I can ask everyone listening today to take action, do something. Do something. Show up somewhere, help somewhere, do something.
It's funny, Randy. I love that. One of the quotes I came across while writing the book was, "No one can do everything, but everyone can do something." And I love what you're talking about with your own platform and sharing stories, because you would notice that the last step I list in the book is actually communicate stories of success. And I felt that was important because in this day and age, right, we sometimes, some of us at work on social impact issues day in, day out, we think everyone's talking about this. The reality is only 8% of US households talk about climate change a year. And yet, when we're all divided and we mistrust social media, we mistrust media, the research shows that one of the best ways that we can actually influence and encourage others to act is by sharing stories with our friends and family. Because when we see that, that acts as an encouragement to us and is the best source of motivation and keeps us going. And I was sharing one of our first campaigns on the eradication of polio, right? That was one of our first campaigns I talk about in the book. And I always remember getting this phone call from this woman, Lorraine, and her daughter, 9 years old, Josie. And they invited me over their house, and they had come across my story, and they had said, maybe this guy can help us. And they had been, I think, to a zoo. They had learned about the elephants. They had learned about the issue of poaching. And Josie said, I want to do something to get this on the agenda. And so I knew nothing about this issue, by the way, but we came up with this petition. She took it to a high school. She spoke at the assembly. She had hundreds of people sign this petition. We managed to get a senator to table it in the parliament. We managed to get it raised in debate. We managed to get the government to agree to look into the issue. And that all started with her story. And I often think about her story and how many people she told, and potentially how many other Josies out there were inspired because of that story. And that was a 9-year-old girl in suburban Australia. And so I think there is something we can all do. And often it's just taking that first action, because if we can take that first action, that will encourage us, that will act as a motivator, give us momentum to continue to act. And so one of my favorite quotes I mentioned in the book, just to wrap this up, was from Eleanor Roosevelt. And I have this magnet on my fridge, which I got when I first moved to New York. And she said, the way to begin is to begin. And the book doesn't profess to have all the answers, but it does aim to give people a place to start, because change starts with all of us.
Well, you and I are both, I'm a storyteller. I call myself a professional storyteller. I create stories for organizations and businesses. I write, I speak, I create stories. Your quote from the book that I loved was, quote, a single compelling story of change can ignite countless other tales of success. So I want to tell you my story. A little bit clueless. I'm 61 now. I wrote checks. I didn't do much volunteering. I focused more selfishly on my business, on my family. I think I was a good person. But was I really paying a whole lot of attention to the world? No, I was not. In my 50s, I became associated with an organization called the Immokalee Foundation. Immokalee, Florida is a migrant farming community. I didn't even know what migrant farming was. Did not even know. A migrant farming community. These families are moving with the harvest. These families are living at or below the poverty level. 35 miles away from Naples, Florida, the second wealthiest zip code in the country. I'm there years before I knew what they did. If your way of taking action is to do something as simple as what I did, just go and learn and walk in the door. That's over 5 years ago. My Mottley Foundation, the Mottley Foundation puts these kids of these hardworking people, these people that feed us, feed millions of us, and struggle to feed their own families. The Mottley Foundation raises money to put their kids into college, their kids into post-secondary. It's crazy what these kids are capable of just by being given an opportunity. And that's an example. That's a story that you had in the book of education and the importance of equal access to education. So if I can suggest to you from my lazy past to my current present, if you do not have a humanitarian cause, if your policy for your family is not to have a humanitarian cause that your family supports, that I think you're failing your family. That's a bold statement, but I think it's true because I failed mine. But Mottley, Florida means the world to me now. And it has changed my life tremendously to see what these young people are capable of. Even living in Naples, such a wealthy community, I always knew this isn't real. And it's not. I moved back to my hometown, Columbia, Missouri, college town, that truly has different ethnic differences and economic differences. I was like, man, this isn't the real people. Where you have, people blue collar, you have white collar, you have education, you have farming, you have all these communities working together. This is how I grew up, and I'd forgotten about it. And I came back to it. It's very important. So that's my sermon about getting involved and doing something and making a difference in what the Mottley Foundation and really that little cute, little wonderful town has meant to me.
Wow. It's an incredible story. It's funny because, often policy, I've tried to think, and it's someone pointed this out to me the other day. They actually said you never name it throughout the book, and it's wonderful hearing people's feedback and what they interpret and what they take away. But they said the flip side of policy, maybe it's the positive aspect, if you were to use it in a positive sense, that people have pointed out. They often said it's about community, and they said the word community runs as a through line through much of the book. And often it is people coming together, building networks, building coalitions, but ultimately building community in order to create change. And it's a recognition that the foundation of implementing effective policy that can affect people making a difference often begins bringing first together your community. And, whether that's, I tell a story about in the book about a town in Western Australia, which is transitioning away from coal towards renewables. And there it was this recognition that if they didn't want to be left behind, like the north of England, which is still scarred from when coal plants abruptly shut in the 80s and workers were put out of work, and it really destroyed the social fabric of many communities and towns in England. They said if we didn't want that to happen, the community needed to own the outcome. And by the way, that also agreed coming to terms with some hard truths, right? About what is the long-term trajectory of coal, especially in a town in which coal has been the lifeblood and part of its identity for more than a century. And many of the workforce that have work in coal mines, work in coal power plants. One of the great quotes I heard from a trade union leader who was talking about this process is when he first got up to try and have this discussion and open it up and say, we need to be having this conversation. Someone said, Steve, shut up. You just don't get it. When someone in this town is born, they get two things. The first is their mother's milk, and the second is a lump of coal in their hand. We're not changing at all. And yet, over the period of 15 years, they're now building arguably the best example of what's called a just transition, where workers aren't left behind. And many of these coal plants are being replaced with batteries to store energy, and I think some of the largest batteries in the southern hemisphere, which is creating jobs. But most importantly, it's preserving the sense of community, of home, and it means that they don't have to leave to find a job elsewhere.
You know what we both do? I've noticed it. I've only noticed this in you and me. Boy, you and I have a story for everything, don't we? I do. And anyone who knows me, I got a story for everything. Everything, every point I want to make, I was like, oh, let's talk about this person, whether it's Aaron Brockovich or Becky Post from Emily Post or Pat Benatar. I got a story about everything. And I love how you've mixed storytelling into the way that you're getting your message out, because that's what I believe in. And that's what I do too. I have to talk about this. Beyoncé, Coldplay, Idris and Sabrina Elba, who we've discussed before, Lady Gaga, Miley Cyrus, Priyanka Chopra, Rihanna and Usher. Those are just a few of the celebrities who have engaged with you on projects. Pick a story. Tell me anything. How does this happen? I mean, those are huge names. Huge.
Well, we spoke about the importance of showing up, and Idris and Sabrina Elba. It's funny. I was with them in December 2019 in Sierra Leone. So Idris is part Ghanaian, part Sierra Leone in terms of his heritage. And we were there as part of his homecoming trip. And we went out and we visited some farmers. And part of the reason why we were meeting these farmers is because in Africa, one of the greatest sources of jobs in terms of potential is in agriculture. 70% of the continent is aged under 30. And if you invested in agriculture, not only could they address hunger, but also jobs. Anyway, we were speaking to this one organization, and this one woman was there who was a farmer, and she spoke about the fact that when the Ebola epidemic happened in West Africa about 10 years ago, and by the way, it was a little bit eerie that we were literally here a few months before the COVID-19 pandemic, and maybe it was a harbinger of what was to come. But this woman was telling us that when Ebola happened, her country was locked down. Most of the organizations left, right? They left the country. She said her own husband left. And she said there was this one organization that stayed to support her. It was called the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD. Again, not the sexiest, most glamorous term. But Idris and Sabrina said, we want to back this organization. Little did we know that just a few months later, when the COVID-19 pandemic happened, and we were thinking back, my God, that woman, what she experienced, millions of people around the world, not least those living in rural poverty who depend on markets to export their goods, are experiencing this. So we started a campaign. They understood instantly that, yes, they could contribute and donate, but if they could get governments to invest, that's at a much larger scale than even they could contribute. And we found ourselves randomly, I was about a year after that. I remember I was in Lafayette, Louisiana. My wife and I, we decided to live in Airbnbs scattered throughout America and actually see some of the country. I woke up in the early hours of the morning to join this Zoom call. There was Idris and Sabrina in one Zoom box in the UK. There was me in, I think the Airbnb was a garage, basically, because I remember ripping down this poster just before. And there he was in the Palace of Versailles in Paris. In all of its glory was President Macron. And I remember we talked through the campaign, and there on that call, he agreed that he would double France's contribution, which you're talking about a difference of tens of millions of dollars to support these farmers. And Sabrina made a profound point when we were talking about policy before. She said, policy at its core, it's about those organizations that show up when others leave. That's what policy is about. It's about showing up and being there when others lead. That's the positive side of policy. And I do believe that 90% of making a difference is about showing up. It's about showing up. And so we're very fortunate. We've worked with some great advocates, Idris, Sabrina, and others. And, I think what's great is they understand they can use their voice in order to bring about systemic change. And Idris himself here in the UK, which is where I am currently, he's embarked on this whole campaign in London with gang violence. Knives is a big issue, and slashing is a huge issue. And I think he's said, I can't allow young people to give their lives away. And he launched this campaign in January, and already it's elevated it up on the agenda, and the parliament's considering it, and they're considering the laws, the regulations, and how they actually address this issue. So I see it not just with us, but many of these advocates. Coldplay, arguably one of the most sustainable bands in the world. Even they're the largest band on the planet, and yet they've done incredible work in terms of addressing climate change and reducing their own carbon footprint.
We all have influence. We all have the ability to influence. And my real takeaway was my personal policies that I didn't really consciously know that I had. And that a policy for change is a very good thing when that change is positive and helps a lot of people. Again, from ideas to impact, a playbook for influencing and implementing change in a divided world. I say this actually every show. I could do this for hours with you. Thank you. What you're doing, what you started doing at such a young age, how you are contributing and mobilizing. It's so inspirational about and making such a difference. And for us to continue to ignore what we need to do, the things that must have for my children's future. You've got a baby, your child's future. It's criminal. It's criminal. I will end this, and I will not end my relationship with you. It is now beginning. I'm going to ask you what I ask everyone at the end of this show, On the Nose, KNOWS, with Randall Kenneth Jones. So I'm going to ask you, Michael Sheldrick, what do you know?
That's a very good question. I would say what I do know is how to make the ask, and sometimes that ask can be very basic. I finish in my book, and I finish it here. In the epilogue of the book, I talk about this older gentleman, Len, who I knew 20 years ago down the street, who honestly, he was in his 80s when I met him during the last year of high school. And recently, during the last week of writing the book, my mom told me, she's an aged care nurse in Australia. And she said, there's this old gentleman who remembers you. He checked in. His name's Len. And I said, oh, he's the guy. He had this dog, wiry gray hair. Literally, it looked like Tramp from the movie, The Lady and the Tramp. And she said, yeah. And I said, how old is this guy? And she said, he's 105 and he's just checked in and he remembers you. And I just remember saying, Mum, I've got to speak to this guy, but here's my ask. I said, I don't know what will come from it, but I just want to speak to him. And my mum FaceTimes him on her phone. And literally, this was about a few weeks before our daughter, Mickey, was born. Literally, there I am speaking to Len. And he was born in 1917. 1939, he gets married. Shortly after that, he gets sent to France. He's in England. And the war breaks out, right? And the Germans are taking over France. He manages to leave, get on the last boat from France, heads to England. He's sent to defend this village. And I asked him, I said, Len, at the end of all that, again, here's the ask. I said, Len, how did you maintain hope? Did you ever think it was all over? And he said, no. We said to ourselves, we haven't got much, but we're not running away. We'll give it a go. We're not running away. We'll give it a go. About a week after that conversation with Len, our daughter, Mickey, was born. And a week after that, I found out from my mum that it was Len's 106th birthday, December 6th. And on his birthday, his daughter came in and he said, I haven't got much else to give, but I'm willing to give it a go. And he passed away that night in his sleep, actually. And it's funny, like he overlapped with Mickey's life for just over a week. But that question, which I pose in the book, we in some ways we've got so much more than what Len had to give. We need to figure out what our special power is, what our strengths are, but we've got so much more. The real question we have to answer is, are we willing to give it a go? And I think, to answer your question in a long way, not only is it about making the ask, but, I know the answer to that question, and I'm willing to give it a go. And I hope this book inspires many more people to also give it a go.
For more information, visit onthenose.com. Please be sure to follow On the Nose with Randall Kenneth Jones on YouTube and subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. For On the Nose, I'm Susan Bennett, the original voice of Siri. And yes, I know. Do you? If not, see you next time.